Your hand is on the door handle of a stash house at 3:14 in the morning, and the engine of a truck you don't own is running in the alley behind you, and every single muscle in your body is telling you to move faster, while every year of training you've absorbed in this life is telling you that moving fast is exactly what gets people killed. Two guards are asleep in the front room. A bag with everything you have left in the world sits against your hip. You've rehearsed this exact door in your head more times than you could count, lying awake for weeks, running through every version of how these next 90 seconds might go. None of those rehearsals accounted for the specific silence of this particular night, thick and total in a way that makes your own breathing sound impossibly loud inside your ears. Then a phone buzzes. Not yours, theirs, from the front room, loud enough in the silence to feel like a gunshot. You freeze, with your hand still on the handle, and for the next 4 seconds, the only sound in the entire world is your own heartbeat and the low, patient rumble of an engine that might, in about 30 more seconds, be the last thing standing between you and a life you spent 11 years building your way into, and one night deciding to walk away from. We'll come back to this exact door. First, you need to understand how a person ends up standing in front of it at all. How it starts. Nobody hands you a contract. You're 17, broke, and a man named Nestor offers you $80 a week to stand on a corner and text one number if a specific kind of car drives past. That's it. That's the entire beginning of 11 years, a phone, a corner, and $80 that felt at 17 like the first real money anyone had ever handed you for anything. Nestor mics you. He tells you this directly, more than once, the way an older brother might. And you don't understand yet that being liked by a man like Nestor is its own kind of debt, one that compounds in ways your 17-year-old brain has no framework for calculating. Within a year, you're not on a corner anymore. You're moving product, then managing two younger boys who remind you uncomfortably of who you were 12 months earlier. By 23, you're someone people in 3 neighborhoods know by reputation before they know your face, someone Nestor trusts with things he doesn't trust to men twice your age. You tell yourself this is success. For a long time, you actually believe it. You buy your mother a car she never asked for. You wear clothes that make people look twice on a street where nobody used to look at you at all. There's a version of this story where that feeling never wears off, where the $80 a week that started everything simply becomes $40,000 a week, and nothing else about who you are ever has to accommodate it. You've met men who live inside that version of the story their entire lives. You used to want to be one of them. The night the story actually changes. You're 26 the night everything shifts, standing in a room you were never supposed to be in, watching Nestor's second-in-command do something to a man who owed money that you will never be able to fully unsee for the rest of your life. Nobody asks how you feel about it. Feelings were never part of the arrangement. You go home that night and you don't sleep, and somewhere around 4 in the morning, you understand, with a clarity that scares you more than the memory itself, that you have maybe 5 more years before you become the man who did that, instead of the man who watched it happen. That's the actual moment you decide to leave, though it takes you another 11 months to admit that decision to yourself in words, instead of just carrying it around as a feeling you can't quite name. Your daughter is born 6 months later, and holding her for the first time in a hospital hallway, the decision stops being abstract. It becomes a deadline. You just don't know yet how impossibly long that deadline is actually going to take, or how much it's going to cost you before it's finally over. You start small, careful moves nobody would ever recognize as an exit plan even if they were watching closely, which, unbeknownst to you, someone eventually will be. A separate bank account under your wife's maiden name, a conversation with a cousin 2 states away about whether there might, someday, be work in his auto shop. Nothing dramatic, just a slow, patient accumulation of small doors you're quietly propping open, one at a time, for a future version of yourself who might actually need them. The first thing you notice, the gray sedan, is nothing, probably. Parked across from your apartment 3 mornings in a row is the kind of detail that means absolutely nothing in a normal life, and means everything once you've decided, secretly, silently, to walk away from a man like Nestor. You tell yourself it's a neighbor's cousin visiting. You check the plate anyway, memorizing it out of a habit you didn't know you still had until this exact moment. It's gone the 4th morning. You breathe out slowly. Tell yourself you're being paranoid, that 11 years in this life has simply rewired your brain to see threats in parked cars and slow-walking strangers. Then, 3 weeks later, a man you don't recognize buys a coffee at the shop across from your daughter's daycare and sits there for 40 minutes without once looking at his phone. You don't say anything to anyone about either of these things. Not your wife, not Nestor, not the 2 people you're still cautiously, quietly, beginning to trust with pieces of a plan you haven't fully built yet. Saying it out loud makes it real in a way you're not ready for, and some part of you still hopes, foolishly, that you're simply wrong. You start writing things down instead, small coded notes in a phone app disguised as something else entirely. Dates and descriptions you tell yourself are just for your own peace of mind. Looking back later, you'll understand that this was the exact moment your body already knew something your conscious mind was still refusing to fully admit, that the watching had already started, and that no amount of telling yourself you were imagining it was going to make it stop. Losing the thing you didn't know you had. Nestor starts giving you smaller jobs. Not fewer jobs exactly, just smaller ones. Tasks that used to go to men beneath you, delivered with the same warm, familiar tone he's always used. Nothing in his voice suggesting anything's actually changed. You've known this man 11 years. You know his voice well enough to hear the one thing underneath the warmth that's never been there before. He's testing you. You don't know what tipped him off, maybe nothing did, and this is simply the ordinary, cautious instinct of a man who's stayed alive this long by trusting nobody completely, not even the people he genuinely likes. Or maybe something specific happened, a conversation overheard, a question you asked slightly wrong, a version of caution you can't trace back to any single moment, no matter how many times you replay the last 2 months in your head. Either way, the effect is the same. You're no longer inside the circle you spent 11 years earning your way into. You're on its edge now, watched, tested, one careless mistake away from confirming whatever suspicion is quietly forming behind Nestor's still friendly eyes. You start performing loyalty in a way you never had to before. Laughing a beat too hard at jokes that used to just make you laugh naturally, showing up early to tasks that used to only require you show up at all. The exhausting part isn't the performance itself. It's not knowing from one day to the next whether the performance is actually working, or whether every extra effort you're making is simply confirming to a man who's spent his whole life reading exactly this kind of behavior that something underneath it has genuinely changed. The visit you can't undo. Your mother calls you on a Tuesday, her voice doing something you've never heard it do before, casual in a way that's trying too hard to actually be casual. 2 men stopped by, she says. Friends of yours, they said. Just checking in, seeing how she's doing. She offered them coffee. They stayed 20 minutes and asked, almost in passing, when she last saw you. You know exactly who sent them, and you know exactly what those 20 minutes actually were. Not a friendly visit, a message, delivered gently enough that your mother didn't even recognize it as a threat, which somehow makes it considerably worse than if she had. This is the exact moment the stakes of leaving stop being about you. You thought, foolishly, that walking away was a decision that only put your own life at risk. Sitting in your car outside your mother's house that night, engine off, hands gripping the wheel, you understand for the first time how completely wrong that assumption actually was.
The paranoia that never fully switches off. You stop sleeping properly. Every car that slows near your building gets a full 10 seconds of your attention before you let yourself relax. Every unfamiliar face at your daughter's daycare pickup line becomes, for a brief, involuntary moment, a possible threat before your rational mind catches up and talks you back down. Your wife notices before you're willing to admit it out loud. She asks, directly, one night after your daughter's asleep, whether something's wrong, and you almost tell her everything right there at the kitchen table. You don't. Not because you don't trust her, but because you've learned, over 11 years, that the less someone you love actually knows, the less anyone can ever make them prove they know it. This is the part almost nobody outside this life fully understands. The danger isn't the only thing eating at you. It's the specific, corrosive loneliness of carrying an entire secret war by yourself, unable to share the actual weight of it with the one person whose comfort you need most. You start noticing your own hands more than you used to, the way they hold a coffee cup a little too tightly, the way they check a doorknob twice before actually leaving a room. Your body has started keeping a version of the vigilance your mind is trying to hide, and there's nothing you can do to fully suppress it, no matter how many times you remind yourself to just act normal, just breathe, just get through one more ordinary day without letting anyone see the specific shape of what's actually happening underneath it. The call you've been dreading. Nestor calls you himself, not through anyone else, which is itself a message before he said a single word. He wants to meet, alone, a location you don't choose, a time you don't choose, and every single thing about the specific structure of that request tells you this isn't a conversation, it's a confrontation dressed up as one. You go anyway because not going would confirm whatever he already suspects faster than actually showing up ever could. He's waiting in a room you've been in a dozen times before, and for the first several minutes, he talks about nothing. Old stories, a shared joke from years ago, the specific warmth he's always been capable of when it serves him. Then he asks you directly, calm, almost gentle, whether you've been talking to anyone you shouldn't be talking to. You say no. It's the most important lie you've ever told in your life, delivered with a steadiness you didn't know you still had left in you. And for 4 unbearable seconds, he simply looks at you, deciding, weighing something behind his eyes you have absolutely no way of reading.
The room they put you in. He doesn't believe you, not fully. 2 men you don't recognize walk you to a back room instead of letting you leave, and the door closes behind you with the specific, final sound that tells your entire body exactly what kind of room this actually is before your mind is finished catching up. Nobody hits you. That's almost worse. They just leave you there, alone, for hours that feel considerably longer than any clock could actually measure. The specific psychological weight of not knowing whether this room is a warning or the last room you're ever going to see. You think about your daughter. You think about the gray sedan, the coffee shop, your mother's 20-minute visit, and you understand, sitting on a cold floor with your back against a wall, that every single one of those details was never actually separate. They were all the same slow, patient tightening of a single hand. Nestor comes back eventually, alone this time, and tells you, without a shred of the earlier warmth, that you're not leaving this life. Not now, not soon, not until he says otherwise. And the specific way he says it makes clear this isn't negotiable in any sense you're allowed to argue with. You walk out of that building alive. You don't walk out of it free, not in any way that matters. And for the first time since your daughter was born, the deadline you set for yourself starts to feel like something that might never actually arrive. The days after that room reshape everything about how you move through the world. You're assigned to work you haven't done since your earliest years in this life, a demotion disguised as reassignment, close enough supervision that the small doors you spent months quietly propping open now feel like they've been slammed shut in front of you all at once. You go home each night and hold your daughter a little longer than usual, saying nothing to your wife about why. Unable to explain a fear that stopped being abstract and started being the actual architecture of your daily life. The other side closes in. Here's the detail you didn't know sitting in that back room. The gray sedan wasn't Nestor's. It was federal, a task force that's been quietly building a case against this entire organization for over a year, and your name, given your position, has been sitting somewhere in their files considerably longer than you ever suspected. 3 weeks after the back room, 2 agents are waiting outside your apartment when you get home, and there's no chase, no dramatic confrontation, just a calm procedural arrest that feels almost anticlimactic compared to everything you've survived over the past several months. You're in a holding cell within the hour, and the specific relief of finally being somewhere Nestor's reach genuinely can't touch is so unexpected it takes you most of the night to even recognize what you're actually feeling. That relief doesn't last. A federal case built around an organization like Nestor's doesn't end with a quiet arrest and a simple sentence. It ends, if you're lucky, with a choice. And the choice they offer you 3 days later is the single hardest decision of your entire life, considerably harder than the one you made holding your daughter in a hospital hallway years earlier. An attorney you didn't choose lays it out for you across a metal table, plainly, without any real attempt at sympathy, because sympathy isn't really his job. Cooperate, testify, and the sentence in front of you shrinks considerably. Don't, and you're looking at years that would take your daughter from a child who barely remembers you to a young woman who never really knew you at all. There's no version of this decision that doesn't feel like betraying somebody. You just have to decide, sitting in that room, which betrayal you can actually live with.
What prison actually means here. You take the deal, reduced sentence in exchange for testimony, 18 months instead of the considerably longer number they could have pursued, and 18 months sounds almost survivable until you understand exactly which facility you're being sent to and exactly how thin the wall is between general population and men who've spent years working for organizations exactly like the one you just agreed to testify against. Every single day inside becomes its own separate exercise in staying alive, watching who sits near you at meals, who lingers a beat too long near your cell, whether a specific glance from a stranger is nothing or is a message from somebody considerably more dangerous than they look. You've survived 11 years of one kind of danger. 18 months inside becomes an entirely different, more claustrophobic version of the exact same fear, with nowhere left to run if it ever actually arrives. It doesn't arrive, not directly, not in the way you spend every single night bracing for. You serve your time, you testify, months later in a courtroom that feels considerably smaller and more mundane than anything about the 11 years it's actually deciding the fate of. You walk out the other side of that sentence alive, which is, by the specific brutal math of everything that came before it, the only outcome you ever actually let yourself hope for. Disappearing. Testimony like yours doesn't end with a handshake and a fresh start. It ends with relocation, a new name, a new city, a version of witness protection considerably less dramatic than movies make it look and considerably more disorienting to actually live inside. Your wife and daughter go with you, uprooted from every single piece of the life they knew, carrying a secret they now have to guard as carefully as you've guarded your own for years. The first few months in the new city feel less like freedom and more like a different kind of confinement, a version of paranoia that doesn't fully switch off just because the specific threat that caused it is, in theory, behind you now. You still check cars that slow near your building. You still watch strangers a beat too long before your mind lets you relax. 11 years of one life doesn't simply disappear because the address changed. Your daughter, old enough now to notice things aren't entirely normal, asks questions you're not allowed to fully answer, and watching her build a life around a truth she doesn't have access to is its own specific, ongoing grief you never anticipated when you first decided, years ago, that leaving was worth whatever it cost. What actually got left behind? You get a job eventually, ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of work that would have sounded like a punishment to the 23-year-old version of you who felt like a success standing on a corner with $80 in his pocket. Some mornings it feels like exactly that, a slow, quiet punishment for 11 years you can't fully take back no matter how far you physically traveled from the person who lived them. You think, some nights, the exact 4 seconds Nestor spent deciding whether to believe your lie in that room, the 4 seconds that could have gone so easily the other direction. You think about the back room, the gray sedan, your mother's 20-minute visit, every small detail that felt separate at the time and turned out to be part of the same slow, patient machine closing in from 2 directions at once. You are, by every legal and physical measure, out. The cartel doesn't know where you live. The case is closed. Nestor is somewhere you'll never have to see him again. And still, on the nights you can't sleep, staring at a ceiling in a house under a name that isn't technically yours, you understand something the title of this exact story tried to warn you about from the very beginning. Leaving a place is a decision you make once, in a single moment, standing at a door with your hand on the handle. Leaving what that place made you into is a decision you have to keep making, quietly, alone, every single day for the rest of your life. And some nights, lying in the dark next to a wife who followed you into a life neither of you chose, you're honestly not sure that second kind of leaving is a thing anyone in your position ever actually finishes.